Alderman Florida.
Present.
Alderwoman Behringer.
Present.
Vice Chairman Williamson. Alderman Moore. Alderman French. Present. Alderman Vaccaro. Present. Alderman Carter. Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
6 present. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We're here today to continue our hearings related to the budget process, and we have here today Rodney Crim from St. Louis Development Corporation. If you would just, as in the past, give us an overview of the budget, the important points that you'd like to raise, and then we'll go to questions from members of the committee.
All right, thank you very much. First, I'd like to make sure everyone is aware of who's in the audience here. First, we have our sister agencies here with Don Rowe with Department of Planning and Urban Design, and Jill Claybour with Community Development Administration. And so, and with SLDC, we have on the front row all of our folks, and Otis Williams, Dale Rousset, if you can raise your hand as we go down the row, Charlie Hahn, who might have a few points, Patrick Bannister, Laura Costello, Melanie Pelletier, and Leslie Mitchell Yancey, our attorney. So first of all, good morning. Thank you. And so what I wanted to do this morning was a couple of things. One is to walk through the SLDC budget, and we're going to pass that around. And again, as before, you know that we come before you. We don't require specific approval, but we've always honored this process to bring our budget before you because we do all work in partnership. And so we wanted to do that. And what we present in front of you is the administration budget for SLDC, as we've done for years. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But then I also wanted to spend some time talking about the partnership, because that is so intertwined into our budget. I know there have been a lot of questions on that. I hope that we can use this opportunity to provide additional information. We won't have time to go through things in a lot of detail, but you will have all the documents, and I ask you to call me directly and ask me any specific questions that you don't get to today. So with that in mind, we'll start with kind of the overview of the package that's in front of you. Let me first describe what's in front of you, and that is an overview and highlights. The next page is our comparative administrative budget. The next page is the SLDC administration budget attachment. The next page is SLDC administrative budget attachment as well. And then our table of organization, and that should be what's in front of you. All right, and so with that, let's go ahead and start. Our budget is roughly $7 million a year. And that hasn't fluctuated too much in the last few years. At one point in time, we had over 100 employees. Through cost constraints, funding constraints, and cost control measures, we've been able to bring that down to roughly 60, in the mid-60s in terms of employees. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we proceed. As you look at our budget, we have again, $7 million, and our funding, just to kind of talk a little bit about how our funding for administration happens. We get it through various programs, but we also generate fees through our alphabet soup of agencies. And that alphabet soup of agencies have administrative agreements with SLDC, and they pass fees and funding to SLDC to cover the administration. As we've talked about before, we don't get any general revenue. So everything that we generate is from fees on services that we provide as well as any assets that we own in terms of generating funding from that. And from that, we then able to cover our expenses. So if you look at that first page on the summary, you see that revenue recap, that kind of last line says overall budget revenue increased $291,000 in FY14. And then if you look down at the end of the expense recap, you see budget expenses are $291,000 in FY14. And this is primarily due to a couple of things. One of the things that we've talked about, just to make sure that this point is very clear, with the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership that we've talked about, that is revenue neutral. We have strived to make that revenue neutral. So that's not the 291. So the 291 is primarily two things. We have our disparity study, which you guys have approved, as you recall. We had board bills 292 and 297. And so the disparity study calls for $75,000 more to be spent. And remember, that's being split three ways. That's 75 from SLDC, 75 from the airport, and you're also approving 75 as part of the city budget that Paul Payne has presented. In addition to that, we have two positions that relate to workforce monitoring. We're actually paying Slate for two positions. One is a auditing kind of position, and one is a monitoring position to make sure that the workforce objectives are met. And as you recall, we knew that this was kind of a new program. We're still trying to figure it all out. But we do know that we want to make sure that city residents, minorities, women, and apprentices have opportunities on private projects as well as public works projects. And so with that in mind, we've had conversations with Slate. Slate says, okay, as we're still trying to figure this out, we immediately need two positions, an auditor and a monitor. And so we are funding that. Now, if you move to the next page, it just kind of further illustrates what I just said in terms of the summary. You can see that, again, our budget, if you look at total revenue, is roughly $7 million with that $291,000 increase. And then you look at expenses and that $291,000 increase, with those items that I mentioned as the primary factors for that increase. Now, if you look at the specific detail, then you start to see where some of the movement is occurring for the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership. As we've talked about before, we wanted to move dollars around to be able to accomplish the same thing without incremental expenses. And so what you see is some dollars starting to move around. And I'll go over this in more detail as we go through the partnership piece, if that's okay with you. Then if you, again, just to kind of illustrate what's here, if you go to the next page, you see just further comments kind of on each of those expense categories. So this provides kind of a quick summary of, okay, why did that category change? But as you can see, personnel went down because the people are shifting to the partnership that we've talked about before, 10 positions. And then related costs associated with that would be business-related costs. We pay fees to be part of the St. Louis Regional Chamber. We help with the T-Rex incubator program. Other things like that would be going with these individuals, and therefore making up what is approximately $1.3 million in expenses. So a transfer of expenses. So if you look at those two pages, they further indicate and reflect what those expense categories are. And then if you go to the last 3 pages, it highlights the table of organization and again shows you the various positions, and then it also reflects 10 positions moving over to the partnership. So our positions started, so they go down to about 55 positions. So I wanted to give you that kind of brief, quick summary, and then if you don't mind, I'd like to delve into the partnership, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes.
Okay. So with that in mind, we're going to pass out some more things.
Yeah.
All righty, so as those are coming around, and we're going to try to do this briefly, but I do want to put a number of pieces in your hand, and then you can, again, we'll talk briefly, but if there are further questions, please feel free to call me with more details. So, the first piece is the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership Summary. This is in essence what we've used to talk from for the SLDC board, as well as the HUTS committee and anybody else who have wanted to talk about this. But the first couple of points are that, there have been outside studies that have been done indicating that cooperation, collaboration, and some type of consolidation of the economic development components of the city and county would be beneficial. The business community has indicated their support for this, and I do have a letter, it's a couple of months ago, from Civic Progress, and I'll share that with you as well. That we've already had a great history over the last couple of years of trying to do more things to cooperate, collaborate, and look for opportunities to consolidate. And so, part of this has been learning to work with each other before approaching this, how do you consolidate components? And so even though we've been working on this for a couple of years, it's been through that kind of process. So the consolidation process and even this cooperation and management agreement, the cooperation and management agreement wasn't actually completed until about the end of March, or sometime in April, because we kept going, because it's the sausage making, and so you'll see that in a moment. Then also the regional chamber played a role. Joe Reagan, who is from Louisville, where Louisville consolidated with Jefferson County in terms of the economic development components, was a great resource. We also used some other consultants to look at this and help us. And then we presented to the mayor and the county exec saying, okay, this is what we found so far, and should we proceed? And again, based on all of the studies, the support of the business community and others, we said, yeah, let's go ahead and continue moving forward. So what the Economic Development Partnership would consist of, given the approvals of both the Board of Aldermen and the County Council, will be moving 30 positions, or in essence, the St. Louis County Economic Council, which focuses on business development primarily, and then 10 positions from the St. Louis Development Corporation, which is focused on business development, moving those two together to create a more unified, more robust business development, attraction, expansion, entrepreneurship kind of engine that impacts the city and the county. The 10 positions that we currently pay for, we would be shifting and transferring those funds to follow those people to the partnership. So there's no request for general revenue funds, and this does not impact the city's CDBG funding in terms of any incremental funding. SLDC will continue to do the same functions that it does currently, and then you see on page 2, it lists all of those things, and going on to page 3, all of those various activities. Then the bottom of page 3, you see the Economic Development Partnership, how that would be structured, combining Denny Coleman, myself, our respective roles, the board of directors being appointed by the county exec and the mayor, and then all of the business development functions that we would provide collectively. So then, as you see on the bottom of page 4, the summary is a bigger, more unified approach to attract and grow businesses and jobs and entrepreneurs in the region, creates more opportunities for city residents, because we can take some of the things that the county is doing and apply those in the city, and vice versa too, in terms of needs that the county might have. Then also, these are just some examples of some things that we've been, in essence, kind of testing already as we've been moving down this process of cooperate, collaborate, and look for opportunities to consolidate. And then if you go on to page 5, I know this has been a question about additional red tape, and there's no additional red tape. Everything that goes through the SLDC city boards will still go through the SLDC city and the city boards, and so there's no changing of the city boards. And then, except for my role, because my role is as the chair of the SLDC board. And then we're looking for continuity on the SLDC team, with Otis assuming these roles and responsibilities in terms of leadership, keeping the team together, so that should help in terms of delivery of services, and no additional costs as we talked about. Before it was presented to the Board of Aldermen, we wanted to take it through our St. Louis Development Corporation Board to get their approval in the form of, and so they have approved the intergovernmental agreement that was presented to you. And the intergovernmental agreement, as you know, is basically a cooperation agreement. The management agreement, which we're going to walk through, is specifically between SLDC and the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership once it's formed, and who's going to do what and how things are going to be shared. And so SLDC board has approved that, and the St. Louis County Economic Council, the equivalent of SLDC, has approved that as well. So now it's obviously at the Board of Aldermen level, and it's at the County Council level. So again, that's a summary of what it is. Now, if we could look at the Cooperation and Management Agreement, that is this document. And so if you have that in front of you now, all right, I'm just going to walk through kind of the sections. I won't go into extreme detail, but again, every alderman here knows my cell number, and so you feel free to call me with any questions that you have. And Alderwoman Behringer is looking to see if she actually has my cell number, and I will, if she doesn't have it, I will make sure that she has it. So you can see on the first page that it's an agreement between SLDC and the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership once the partnership is formed. And St. Louis County Economic Council will become the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership. So there will be a change for that to occur. Then you see all the whereases, which a lot of them I have already covered. Then it talks about the intergovernmental agreement. Once that's approved, then that would be the reference to that. And then if you go on to page 2, you see that it highlights what the intent is in terms of combination of functions and activities. Then you go 2.1. It talks about all the business-related items that we would do. Again, the same as what I just shared with you on the summary. Then you go to page 3. You see the staffing, again, is what we've just talked about in the summary. We talked about 2.3, SLDC operations, those operations being the same as they are now. And you saw that list in the summary, and so that's reflective of what that is. 2.4 just talks about reports and business records. You know, when you get into the nitty-gritty of this, where are the reports going to be, where are the records going to be, et cetera. And so we've tried to anticipate that and make sure that things are where they need to be for the people who are actually doing the work on both sides. If you go over to page 4, this is the funding part. And as I said, that the funding in essence follows the people. Now, Charlie, like most controllers across the public and the private sector, you tell them what the objective is, and then they figure out how to move the dollars to accomplish that. And so we said, okay, the objectives are that we're currently paying for these people now. We want monies the equivalent to what we're paying for these people now to move over to the partnership. And so, but we want that to be as clean as possible. So that is what that's trying to do. He's, we worked with a number of our funding streams to figure out which ones could follow the people. But it is not an incremental $1 million. It is a transfer of funds. And so we know that's kind of the base funding, but then in addition to that, we know that we have dollars, like I said, for regional chamber membership, our incubators that we help support, other business things that we do. And those things are reflected in 3.4. And we just say, okay, above $1 million, we're going to call that a funding deficit. Okay, so how do we pay for that? But really, we're paying for 3.2 and 3.4. The dollars are following the people. Okay. Then if you go to 3.5, we went through weeks and weeks of discussions on this one to try to make sure it made sense. And we know that as we go forward, we're going to learn some things that might result in us having to change some of this, but we want to at least kind of get it started and then figure it out. So this would mean that, again, the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership has staff that's focused on driving business for the city. So there are fees that should go directly back to SLDC. And it's kind of a circle. It goes back to SLDC to help fund these people that are in the partnership. And so we kind of come up with this kind of, it is still kind of convoluted a little bit, but it's kind of our simplest way of trying to do that. And then in 3.6, we gave ourselves some room to try to figure it out. And that's, near that last sentence where it says, to the extent a situation arises where there is a question or disagreement between the parties as to whether specific fees should be included or excluded from the definition of city activity fees, then the parties will, in advance, if possible, negotiate in good faith to reach a reasonable resolution of such dispute or question. So, we just said, okay, this is our best shot, but we know we're going to learn some things, and we're going to have to talk about some things as they happen. And if you go back to 3.4 for a second, because it's another similar kind of control, and that one is that is kind of near the beginning, and it says, well, actually the sentence starts with, as set forth in section 3. So it's at the beginning. 3.d of the intergovernmental agreement, SLDC and the city acknowledge that the total costs and expenses to be incurred by the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership to assume and provide the staffing and services set forth in a governmental cooperation agreement, and this agreement exceeds the funding obligation, exceeds the $1 million. So the amount of the funding deficit shall be determined annually by St. Louis Economic Development Partnership and SLDC prior to start of the SLDC's fiscal year. So what that means is that prior to the beginning of the fiscal year, Charlie will have it in the budget, and then everybody would discuss it. He'll have it in the budget, and then that'll go before the St. Louis Development Corporation Board to review and approve. So if somebody doesn't like it at the board level, at that point, there will be a mechanism to challenge that. All right, bottom of page 5, we talk about the term being 10 years, but then we go into 4.3 and 4.4 is, there are mechanisms to terminate if, things are going really bad. But again, we're not in it for it to fail. We're in it to try to make it a success and to accomplish all the objectives that we're trying to accomplish. But if things really get bad, there's a process here to terminate. And then the rest of this is primarily kind of legalese as you go on page 6 and 7 and 8. That's all the things that generally Leslie and the legal team, both internal and external, make sure that that it's involved. Make sure that that's included in our agreements. Then if you go to page 11, this just gives you an illustration of who those people are in those positions, and that's just a quick snapshot. And then if you go to the last page, that just gives you a quick summary of what the anticipated budget is. This is what we're planning. However, it could be different. And that's just, the way budgeting occurs. But this is what we're planning. Okay, so that is that. I did want to share just one or two quick other things. And I know there was a question that came up last week about, okay, Rodney, you say that the business community is supporting this. And, a lot of people have said it vocally, and there have been articles in the newspaper with people quoting and making their comments that they're in support of it. And this is just a letter that I received from Civic Progress, and this is the president of Civic Progress, who's also in support of it. So it's just FYI. All right, now I have a lot more information, but I want to be conscious of the time. The chair and I talked about our time. And so, Mr. Chair, if you would like me to open up for questions, would you just like people to call me with more details, or what would you prefer?
No, we can open it up for questions at this point.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I am available for questions.
Alderwoman Cruzen? Alderwoman Florida?
I just want to, for the sake of our public, I want to read the first item here and then ask my question. 2010 study by the PFM Group of Philadelphia summarized, there is across the country a growing acceptance of the need for jurisdictional competition to be replaced by cooperation for economic development. And so you've been working on a collaboration for a couple of years. And so my question is this: you've had some successes. Have we been able to quantify the economic impact of some of the projects that you've worked on in the last 2 years?
Yeah, it's like you just mentioned, it's been a 2-year process of learning to work together. Starting with what we call cooperating, so saying that we're going to try not to compete with each other or have companies try to compete and place us against each other. The other is collaborating, and so collaborating on a number of regional initiatives, entrepreneurship, the biogenerator, a number of other initiatives. And one in particular is the in this whole bio field of how to get Slate involved in that. And so if you go to the summary document that I provided, and you go to page 4, and that third bullet point, access to more financial and other resources that will benefit the city as well as the county. An example is the BioJobs Accelerator Grant that is a partnership with the county, approximately $700,000 that the county received. Slate actually received the most at $900,000, and the Minority Supplier Council received approximately $150,000. And what Slate does is provides on-the-job training. Now, so that's just one example of dollars that are resulting from this process of working more effectively together. There's a regional entrepreneurship initiative that we're benefiting from, and that was because of the closure of the Chrysler plant in Fenton. The Economic Development Administration provided the county with some dollars. And so the county is using those dollars, working with us to create a regional entrepreneurship initiative. Now, they could have just said, we just want to use these dollars for the county. But they recognize that they're in our spirit of our cooperate, collaborate, that there's greater opportunities in us working together to create entrepreneurship opportunities across the region. Because for those who are looking for jobs, they want a job. You know, they might live in the city or they might live in the county. So if there's anything we create within the region, it's going to benefit everyone. So that's just an example, and there'll be more examples of those.
Thank you.
That's all you have? Okay. Alderwoman Behringer, have any questions?
I do, Alderman Williamson.
All right. Very well.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
I'm excited about this. First of all, my husband's family is originally from Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
And we watched as Louisville, as we call it, blended the city and the county, and they did it quite successfully, and it's made a tremendous impact on that area. The one thing that my question is, I'd like to see, because it's very important for us in St. Louis, because by doing this, we have a stronger voice, we have a better presence in Jefferson City, where our counterparts on the other side of the state have already been doing this quite well. So I'm going to assume, which I don't want to do, that we will be working very well for advocacy to bring more development on the east side of the state via Jefferson City.
Yes, that is correct. I think that we will have a stronger, more unified voice in Jefferson City, and we'll look for those opportunities that benefit our region, but also can benefit the state as a whole. And so I think instead of all of us individually going to Jefferson City, we'll say, hey, you know, we represent over, 1.5 million people plus. I think as we get going, we'll be able to also attract St. Charles and some of the other areas around us. But we're just starting with what we have, and that's the city and the county.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Williamson.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think the partnership, I really hope it works out. I think we're a benefit if we, as a metropolitan area, if it really comes to shape. And hopefully we'll work, we'll benefit economically for the city of St. Louis, because that's mainly the alderman's concern, is the city benefiting it. One question I had about, you and the other, I guess it's 9 or 10 employees that I believe going to the county.
Yes.
Will it be a residential ruling as far as where you guys will be living at? Will you be still required to live in the city, or will you be able to move in the county? And that discussion came up, I guess several days ago, mainly because of the earnings tax. So could you kind of elaborate on that and explain to us?
All right.
How does that work out?
I like where I live in the city, and
Well, will you remain in the city?
and
You
so-
may go
and-
to Ladue and like Ladue.
Oh.
I'm just asking.
No, thank you, Alderman. The 10 positions do become employees of St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, which is a revised St. Louis County Economic Council. So they do have the flexibility of living in the city or the county. However, as I talk to the 10, I don't think anyone's planning on moving. Plus, if you look at the county business staff, a number of them live in the city. And as Alderwoman Behringer is pointing out, 2 live in her ward. I know that at least 1 or 2 live in Alderwoman Hubbard's ward in Old North. And there are others. So I think that, it's not a, I think people will be, even though they have that option, that many people will still continue to live where they live.
Okay. But the option does, you do have the option.
The option does,
flexibility.
yeah,
Okay.
and again, just the option does exist.
Gotcha.
However, I do believe that most people probably will stay where they are.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you.
And just on that point, a similar point, is that we do want to make this very transparent for the businesses that we work with in your wards. So we anticipate that our meetings will be at the business or at 1520, so they won't have to go out to the county to meet. I mean, we'll be wherever it's convenient for the businesses to be.
That's all right.
Alderman Moore?
I'm sure most of you know how I feel about this city-county merger. I feel like my ward suffers, and you feel my pain, and you hear me all the time talk about the 4th Ward. I've never been approached by CDA, SLDC about a program or something innovative that would help create the betterment for my constituents in that particular community. We live in third world conditions. We live like the Flintstones compared to the Jetsons. Yabba dabba do, but we're not having a gay old time. It's very serious in there. I have over 2,500 lots that are empty. I could be wrong. It could be 1,900 with grass growing 4 to 6 feet tall. We develop, we demolish, but we don't develop. I feel like this merger will continue to put the 4th Ward in the back of the line. Someone has to really convince me that this merger is good for my community. And I have to be selfish and prejudiced towards the 4th Ward because my constituents sent me down here to find out what the heck was going on and why is it that we continue to suffer. And we echo out little small things. Basically, when I ask for various things for my ward, it's no, 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 no. It's the no bird. And I don't know how this is going to put us in line when it seems like it puts us in the back of the line. I've got over 800 people on the list for home repair. And it's just disrepair and just devastating in that community. And how can we as a city government sit back and look at a community like this, part of St. Louis, behind the Gateway Arch Wall, and see the failure and the continued demise of that once grander community with all the African American history there. And I think it's just deplorable that we are here talking about this. And a lot of people think that on the day of the vote, I wasn't here. I was trying to save 50 acres of land that I probably had to go to when I get out of politics. I'm sure I'll be run out of St. Louis on a rail, but I had to save my land. But I was determined to be here. I almost killed myself trying to get back here to get my vote in, but that's over. But I am definitely not for that merger. I think it's the beginning of the city and the county merging together. And I don't know how we can sit back and just let this happen. But I understand you have a job, you have a boss, and you have to do what's on the table. But I just feel really saddened by the fact that we're now I feel like we're getting further and further behind in the 4th Ward. And someone needs to convince me that in this scheme of things that it's going to get better for the Fourth Ward and how it's going to get better for the Fourth Ward, because I haven't been offered anything. And a lot of my colleagues will come behind me or before me and say, they're talking about how great their wards are because they inherited great things. I didn't inherit nothing but a lot of disservice and dissatisfied people in a community that continue to suffer. So I would say to my colleagues and anyone else, please don't comment on what I'm saying about my ward, because I was elected to serve those people in the Fourth Ward who are actually and absolutely suffering for many years, and we haven't got out of that rut yet. Thank you.
Alderman French?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have a few questions. So looking at the SLDC's budget here, about $2 million comes from block grant funds. You know, one of the concerns that the folks from HUD raised when we had that briefing was that such a large chunk of the block grant funds given to the city goes to pay for the administration of the city's development agency. If this new plan goes in where all block grant funds are awarded on a competitive basis, will SLDC continue to get, or will they apply for that $2 million?
I know that over I think it's even starting next week, there are going to be a number of meetings regarding the HUD program and the changes, et cetera. And so I know there are going to be a lot of individual meetings with the aldermen. You know, SLDC and development agencies will still apply like they have been in the past, but we will also be required to meet whatever the new HUD requirements are as well.
So this $2 million, or I guess the requested $1.7 million, is not certain for next year?
And again, we'll ask CDA to kind of comment on the overall CDA or CDBG budget, but we do plan on these things. We do follow the requirements that HUD has to comply with our funding requests, and so we feel that these numbers should be good for, and again, you know, HUD kind of goes on a calendar year, so we'll be, so this should be good for the calendar year.
Okay.
And Jill will tell me if I say something wrong.
So can you tell me how how this potential merger affects the other agencies under you, so the LRA, LCRA?
Right. So the short answer is that it does not affect those agencies. So if you look at the summary, as well as the management agreement, because it's listed there as well, but if you go to page 3.
In the summary or the management agreement?
Yeah, page 3 of, starting on page 2 of the summary, and then it's in a paragraph in 2.3 of the management agreement. It highlights all those things that remain the same.
Okay. So the operations at LRA and these other agencies won't change at all?
That is correct.
Any of the personnel that will be moving out to Clayton, are they currently in roles that support these services?
Not directly. They are, you know, if a business needs a LRA lot that's next to them, then the business person works with the LRA person to accomplish that, but then it still goes through the LRA board. So there are no changes to any of the boards. There are no changes to any of the people that have primary responsibility either for that list on page 2 and 3 of the summary or 2.3 of the management agreement.
Okay. What about the activity fees? Any fees generated by these sub-agencies? Will those fees go to pay for this new agency?
And again, the fees, and specifically the city activity fee, there's some assumptions under that which are primarily business development activities generate fees that go partially to SLDC The first 500,000 is indicated, and then a split depending on if the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership folks drove that particular activity. So there is a designated portion of the fees that go direct, and then the rest are shared.
And that includes fees generated from, like, the Port Authority, LRA?
No. Those fees still stay the same.
So those aren't split in any way?
Right, those aren't split. It's just the ones that the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership drives that for 99% will be straight business stuff, but sometimes it might be something that they're driving for a business that's next to them, and they might be sharing.
So hypothetically, if it's a project that involves the sale of a large portion of LRA land,
Then it's all LRA.
so the city gets all that fee?
That is correct.
Okay. And speaking of fees, can you go over one more time this, the base funding obligation, the $1 million?
Yeah, so
It's annual?
that is annual. So as you can see from our budget, as well as the last page of the attachment on the management and cooperation agreement, you see that salaries, et cetera, fringe benefits, all that stuff is almost $1 million. You see it's 967 on that last page.
Right.
All right. So think about the million in terms of the people-related costs. And then in addition to the million, then you have other things that, like we're members of the St. Louis Regional Chamber, and there are other business associations and business activities that we're part of that represent amounts above that million. And as I said before, all of that would then be reviewed, discussed, and approval sought from SLDC staff and the SLDC board at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Okay, so all told, it's about 1.3 million.
That's correct.
And where does that 1.3 million come from?
It's a reallocation of funding, because remember that the objective is to keep this revenue neutral. So to keep it revenue neutral, these are already dollars that we're spending. And so our sources of funding, as I said before, include fees and assets that we own, that we generate, fees and other funding from programs that we administer, and so on. So all that goes into, for lack of a better word, this consolidated list of fees. And so with that, there's just kind of a reallocation of fees to cover that. So it's not an incremental dollar amount.
So the 1.3 million will come out of the 7.2 million in total revenue.
That is correct.
But that includes 1.7 in block grant. So do you foresee any of that 1.2 million coming from block grant funds?
Not directly to, and again, it's not directly would be the answer. I think there's some movement of dollars that touch block grant, but it's nothing that's any incremental dollars to block grant.
Okay, but again, though, we're not completely sure that we're going to have that pot of, let's just say that $1.7 million of block grant fund is not as secure as it used to be.
Yeah, I would say that we have to compete for block grant just like anybody else. Yes.
Okay. So this is a lot of information, especially this management agreement, and as I've said before, I kind of wish we had this before the HUD vote so we can actually process it a bit. I'll spend some time over the next few days going through it, and I hope you would be available to some questions.
I would definitely be available for anyone who wants to call me.
All right, thank you.
Alderman Vaccaro? Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Any other salient points you'd like to make to us?
No. Again, I thank you for the extra time this morning to kind of cover that as well. We have Don Rowe and Jill Claybour here. I think your information is in the budget book. I don't know if they just want to be available for any questions you have, or if there are some points that they might want to make. So I'll ask Don and Jill to come up.
Mr. Chairman, it's your pleasure as to whether you'd like to hear from Jill first or from me first. And if you know it's from me, it's I like to talk, so there's that risk.
I do know you do. Yeah, let's go ahead with you since
Right.
you're up.
And would you like to make me have, as Rodney said, there are relevant parts of my budget, which are planning and urban design is City Department 141, so we are in the budget book. Is there opportunity you'd like me to say a few things,
Yes,
or was it just?
If you take a few moments.
Okay. As I said, the Planning and Urban Design Agency is a city department. So our personnel, our civil service and personnel, and you've heard me talk about this in years past, but it's certainly true yet again, that appreciate and thanks for being here, because we do get funding from two different sources. We get a very humble amount of general revenue money, and then we get the majority of funding from the block grant. And the summary point is we're pretty austere in our budget. As you look at it, it's pretty tight that personnel is the expense. And as you know, and has made reference, the Community Development Block Grant is under strain. So we'll proceed with that with all due diligence to see how things evolve over the coming year. Also on staff now, we have on RTO 18 folks. So that's down a bit from a high point of having 26 folks. And of those folks that we have on board, I was taught to share, and I share sometimes to my detriment, in that I think, and there's a point to this, is that we embrace technology as much as we can, because we think that's valuable to the public, because we can do things electronically and remotely and through the web, and it's valuable to us for our efficiency and for things that we can share with other city departments and with overall city systems. So I say that I have a young gentleman that works for me that's a system development analyst in terms of the city's matrix. I just call him our computer guru. And it's now in a format of being austere. Only about 40% of his salary comes out of my budget, and IT kicks in the rest. And I think that's only fitting, because I see him in my lending, they get a pretty good deal in terms of this technology boost and talent that he brings to us. And then I have others that are, of the 18, I have one person that's working primarily on one particular topic. So we're a small group, and as you know, we don't have funding that we administer or send out. We do planning activities, and much of that is not cookbook stuff. It's things that are responses to needs in the community and the wards. Like I said, we've tried to push a lot of things out to the web that might be sort of viewed as being a cookbook in a way. So Geo St. Louis is something that is we're the custodian of, and we find that for our own purposes to be valuable, and that's certainly readily available to the community. And once you delve into it a little bit and take the tutorials, you find out that outside folks, it's a web-based tool. You can get a lot of information, do a lot of things via Geo St. Louis. We also, as you know, have things that we do that are just part of our regulatory function. Certainly the Cultural Resources Office gets things in over the transom in terms of of protecting our historic districts in terms of building permits, demolition permits, gauntlets of things that we are just in that permitting aspect to. And then also we're trying to look at, and we look at the creation of new historic districts and protecting that valuable resource that helps make us be an urban community that's desirable. We have some things that are just sort of in the back that we do. We're in the midst of doing a report now that we do on an annual basis. That's a report that we give to the Treasurer's Office, that the banks report to us their lending activity, their mortgage lending activity in the city, and we do a task where we take that data, which is good accounting type data, and make a report out of it that adds to what we do best. And that is we put it on maps, we slice and dice it in various categories to the census, and then provide that to the treasurer. And the new treasurer received a copy of last year's and is quite excited about getting this year's. Another part, I'll say that's part of our regular routine, is of course we have two boards that we administer, the Planning Commission and the Preservation Board. Both of those are the majority membership in those are citizens, and the actions that come before them are ones where there's testimony, particularly at the Cultural Resources, and some circumstances with the Planning Commission. So those are boards that meet in the late afternoon and roll into the evening. Hopefully that makes it a little bit more accessible. I will tell you on my end, that also means that there's a little bit more comp time that's given to staff that's supporting those at night. So it gets to be it's pretty tight during the day. And then there are just the responses and our hopes to go out and work on projects in your community. So I will be uncharacteristically brief and stop there with laying that out in general, but be happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions? Alderwoman Cruzen.
No questions. I appreciate the help that you give various projects. I just want more of it. It's only a little bit, and I appreciate the input, and I think probably many aldermen feel like that planning is this basic city function in such a dynamic city. And I'm sure if we went down the road here, which we're about to do, there'd be a lot of people who would like to have more planning help.
There's no pun there about going down the row, is there? Oh, okay.
Alderwoman Florida.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Lyda. I appreciate all you do. Basically, I know that you've assisted with the MVA, the market value analysis that Dr. Swanstrom provided, and we're about to enter in our first HUD's aldermanic meeting. And I understand that you will be assisting with the more technical market value analysis soon with the technical consultants. My question is, couldn't we apply the market value analysis to our LRA inventory and analyze the parcels in that way as we create a strategy to deal with our LRA properties? Would you have the capacity to do that, and do you see the value in doing that?
Okay, I'll take a few pieces of that. Professor Swanstrom is working in this whole environment, and we have helped him provided some data. The market value analysis key component is something that HUD is paying for through their technical assistance with Ira Goldstein, based in Philadelphia. And he presented to you in this room a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
I'll make a couple comments. They've done that market value in a number of cities, Mr. Goldstein and his team. And before he came to present to you, and before he really got into doing work, because meaning after that presentation to you, he's been back, his team's been back. But before he came to present to you, he came into town, and we spent about 14 hours together.
Okay.
And part of that, in fact, most of that, was out in the city. Because I knew when he went back to Philadelphia, we can do all the things we can possibly do with computer links. But I wanted him to get the Cook's tour of St. Louis. And we did that in that we went to every one of your wards, and we also did things that I'm really sensitive about, is that I always want to sort of bisect an area, where we go to an area that's challenged and keep on driving, and you get to an area with a different characteristics and health. And some of those areas are small pockets. But I wanted him to get an idea of what our lay is of that real geography, because he will, on a computer, end up using things like census blocks, census block groups, and they all have a line. And that wanted him to have the sensitivity to do that. Before we went out, we looked at a city map. We looked at a number of city maps. And one of the maps we looked at was LRA land, and one was on vacant buildings. And when you do that on a citywide basis, you get an idea of what the volume is of those and percentages are. I will just say this, that he was highly appreciative of his orientation from those 2 days. And we know he's back and working. And so I think that the tagline to this is, especially as we've seen it in other cities, as he makes this market value analysis, it ends up being very well illustrated via mapping. And that will also translate into, because land and LRA land is all geographic based, that I think there'll be an easy or an interplay that you can use the market value analysis to help with vacant land, whether it's private or the public LRA inventory. So that's, I believe that as a tool is going to be able to be transferable, certainly from the block grant to other things, whether it's LRA land, tax abatement, those type of things.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Barringer.
Thank you. I just have a quick question, because the lessons I learned from urban planning are invaluable, and I always apply them every time somebody wants to tear something down or build something in the 16th Ward. Do we have any type of a talk that you give to the new aldermen to give them some ideas like ingresses, egresses, where they should be planting, just using aggregate versus plain concrete?
Good point. And the reason I smile is I love new aldermen. And that's no lack of room in my heart for all of you that have been around for so long. But it's part so that we can do that type of thing. And so we get a little bit encumbered at the beginning of somebody's new term with giving the big picture and the community building stuff, and then to say, and we're always there for that big picture stuff, but if you really want to think about, because part of this is placemaking, and part of placemaking is what is it that you experience when you're standing on a spot. We're happy to talk to you about aggregate or something that's really detailed and make it valuable.
Okay, thank you.
So I get cell phone calls about little things like that.
Alderman Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, my question is, do you have any plans to kind of talk to each alderman? I know when I first got elected, and you kind of sat down and talked to me, and kind of we and your staff and overlooked the 26th Ward. Do you have any future plannings of going, to each alderman or alderwoman, if it's necessary to kind of look, this is what we kind of have planned for the city of St. Louis. We think this would fit your ward as best when it comes to housing, economic development, commercial. Do you guys you have any plans on doing that in the near future?
I'll be honest, austerity breeds only a certain number of hours in the day. So I will say the new Aldo people are getting that sort of first level of love to get in contact with them now so they get a new briefing. Do I have an organized approach to going back and seeing the other 26? Not really. Be happy to.
Is it a, you know, I guess a holistic plan of the city of St. Louis? Do you have that just in general for the whole city when it comes to development?
Good point. And so most of you that know me, when we're on a one-on-one meeting, I always bring a map. Well, I'll just bring one that's folded up. And this is the strategic land use plan for the city of St. Louis for all 61 square miles. And it's really, we call it the strategic land use plan. It's really the land use component of our city's comprehensive plan. And a comprehensive plan is a fundamental part of city government authorized and mandated by state government. And for years we didn't have one. But we do have this one that we first adopted in 2005. And at some point we have to think about a review of that, other than the review we do sort of quickly about changes that have occurred each fall. But this is the overall roadmap for the city.
So if you have an extensive plan for a particular ward, now will you still need to lean on us for additional dollars in order to complete that planning, or is there any grants available from the federal government that can assist us with planning in our wards?
Times are tight. So we'll help you with staff to come and do things as we can. And often it's a mixture of us helping to lay out a framework and connect some dots for you. And then if there's more embellishment, it often takes some other resources. And one of the things that happens in the block grant side of the world is that cap that we talk about, it's really called the planning and an admin cap. And so it's skinny at our point of funding planning and administration that we do to find extra dollars to go and hire consultants from the block grant. But there's instances where institutions and others have helped fund some consulting work on individual geographies.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alderman Moore?
No.
Alderman French? Even before I could ask, no questions. Alderwoman Florida has a follow-up.
Thank you. Don, would we be able to enter into some kind of internship program with university to strengthen our planning and to give young people an opportunity, work experience in a field that they may choose?
We are going to have 4 interns this summer.
Okay.
From around the country. One of the things when you look at our personnel schedule is we're pretty skinny in the management level.
So
we've had people retired, and we're just skinny in that way. So interns are a double-edged sword.
Right.
Is taking the time to administer and use them is one of those things that you got to do a tight balancing act to do.
Right. Then you have to evaluate.
And so last year we had a couple interns with really smart projects. This year we've opened the floodgates a little bit more because we don't pay a dime. And so knowing that we're not paying a dime, we're trying to give a little bit more of an educational experience to them, and then also wreck them like hell. But this is a year that we're doing more of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other questions?
Yeah,
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for a moment. Just in case there were some questions.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for affording us the opportunity to present, in a sense, represent a part of our budget. You know, we do that in the major way in the fall at the HUD's committee and with the rest of the board. I'm here today with a couple members of our staff. I want to be sure they're acknowledged. Our fiscal manager, Brian Yocum, and our director of administration, Alana Green, have provided a lot of support. I believe that the relevant pages in the city budget book that relate to community development administration start on page 36. Again, as I've just stated, we appear before the HUD's committee with our full budget every fall after meeting with most of you all, if not all of you all individually, because the funds that we administer from HUD, the Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership funds, come to us on a calendar year budget basis. So we do appear in the city budget book insofar as the funds that relate specifically to the operating costs of our staff. And we're here to, talk about that and answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from members of the committee? Don't go into shock.
I'll try to.
If you could see her face on this end. But if there are no questions, then we appreciate your brief description.
Well,
Everyone has your number also.
Well, yes, and I do hope you won't hesitate to call me as in the future as you have in the past. So take care. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that completes our review of the St. Louis Development Corporation. So thank you for coming. Public utilities. Yeah, we're about take up